Hello, and welcome to the Logistics Management Podcast Series. My name's Jeff Berman. I'm Group News Editor for Logistics Management Magazine and the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group. Today, it's a real pleasure to welcome two executives from San Diego-based parcel consulting firm Shipware. First, we have Karamcheti. Adi worked for FedEx for 18 years, splitting time between sales and revenue management and working with shippers, spending up to $30 million or more on parcel shipping. As a result, he brings a unique skill set to his shipware clients, understanding what motivates carrier sales representatives as well as their pricing departments. Adi has the insider knowledge to help maximize leverage in any negotiation. He holds an MBA from Waynesburg University and a master's in public and international affairs, as well as a BA in history from the University of Pittsburgh. We also have today on our podcast Paul Yaussy. Paul is Paul has a tremendous understanding of the day-to-day pressures logistics managers are under and brings that unique perspective to his consulting role. He joined Shipware in April 2021 after more than 2 decades in the logistics management field. Recognized as a transportation cost reduction specialist, he's managed transportation at a large national retailer where his team was responsible for $15 million in truckload, less than truckload, and intermodal spend, and $60 million parcel spend annually. In addition, Paul has managed all their transportation RFPs as well as parcel RFPs for the larger private equity consortium, which saved more than $13 million annually for more than 30 shippers. In his time away from work, Paul enjoys spending time with his wife and 2 daughters and hitting the links as often as possible. I also have 2 daughters, but it sounds like Paul is a better golfer than I am. But hey, Adi and Paul, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks
Thanks,
very
Jeff.
much for having us, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a long time coming. Shipware has been a great friend to the magazine over the years, and it's great to finally make this happen. I guess we can just start with sort of a basic overview here, guys. And why don't we start with Adi, and then we can move over to Paul in terms of how you guys would just sort of view or describe the current state of today's parcel marketplace.
I think the current state, Jeff, is one in flux. And when we're seeing it, we think in terms of COVID, power really shifted to the parcel carriers, FedEx and UPS. There was more demand than there was capacity. That's shifted away now as the economy slowed, as both these carriers expanded capacity, overexpanded it to adjust for COVID. They now have all this additional capacity, and they are trying to fill the space on their trucks and planes. So right now, there is definitely an advantage for shippers. However, the carriers are sneaky. They'll lower fees in one area and raise it in another area. Typically, what we see is on fuel surcharges specifically, other surcharges as well, while giving you concessions on the back door on fuel. They'll raise how they measure that, apply that index, so you end up still paying more. So it is something where it's complex, and you have to be smart about it. But if you are smart about how you deal with both carriers, you can get good deals.
Terrific. What's your take, Paul?
I agree with Audie, and would probably add that most of the trends that we saw in 2024 are continuing so far here in this first half of 2025, where the carriers definitely have capacity in their networks. The carriers both. When I say carriers, oftentimes I'm referring to FedEx and UPS as the big 2, and the ones that most listeners are probably interested in the most. But when I talk about the carriers, they on their earnings calls, they openly talk about average daily volumes or volume in general being flat to minimal growth. And because of that, the carriers are competing to win volume. The carriers need volume to optimize their networks fully, and so the only way to compete for volume is on price. So we're still seeing a very competitive environment as it relates to the parcel industry in general.
That's great. You guys kind of answered it, but just now. But why don't we sort of address the current state of parcel rates and pricing? Paul, you had just mentioned volume as a factor, and Adi had mentioned fuel as well. Where do things kind of stand? And I guess we could sort of hit on things like the GRI increases we see every year by the duopoly of FedEx and UPS, and things along those lines. How should shippers, how should our audience members be viewing and considering those types of things?
Sure, I could jump in first, Jeff, and then have Audie
Yeah.
follow up. But you mentioned GRI. Both the carriers and even the regionals did take a 5.9 GRI increase this year, right at the beginning of the year, or in the UPS case, it's the last week of December. And for listeners who may not know what GRI is, that's a general rate increase, which they do take every year. So it's a 5.9 general rate increase, but as shippers know, that's only on base rates. Uh, and surcharges generally go up, at a much higher clip than that. So we're seeing where surcharges are going up anywhere from 7 to 10% more, or even higher, depending on specific surcharges. Where you'll see most shippers take an increase in that 7-8% range, but they're planning on a 5.9% because of the announced GRI. So, one of the things you really got to be cognizant of is really paying attention to what's happening with surcharges, because it can impact your parcel costs pretty dramatically.
Absolutely. And anything to add there, Adi?
I think one of the things that we talk about regularly is, and you said it, they're a duopoly. FedEx and UPS is a duopoly. So you get this rate increase. How many vendors of the different folks listening out there, if you're a business shipping with these two carriers, how many of your vendors can implement a rate increase at the same time every year on a yearly basis? Probably none. And that's what these guys do. And so on top of that, you have this rate increase. It happens at the same time, and you have very few places you can go. Paul mentioned regionals. We are seeing the regionals capture some of this business, but even if you want to ship with regionals, they only are really handling residential delivery. So what about all that commercial volume? The post office is an option, but it's generally not considered a great one, at least not by most of our clients. So it's one of those things where you do have to constantly police this, and that is a challenge for most folks.
Okay, great. Let's shift gears over to examining the impact of market conditions on service. How do you guys see that?
So I think the market conditions now right now, Jeff, are in flux. We have so much going on, and you have an administration that's implementing changes on a daily basis across a wide spread of areas. The focus as it relates to parcel, and I know we're going to be getting into it later, has to do around the tariffs, but there are other changes happening throughout. And what that's done is create an environment of unpredictability. And I think that's what everybody, shippers as well as the parcel carriers themselves, are trying to adjust to this, but with changes coming every day, it's very difficult to plan. So I think the key word around all of this, as we speak generally about the marketplace, is unpredictability, uncertainty.
And Jeff, you asked about how it's affecting, service levels. So, both carriers, FedEx and UPS, are undergoing cost-cutting measures. UPS calls it bigger, not better, or network of the future, and FedEx calls it Drive or Network 2.0. Where they're consolidating all of their networks into one. And as we talked about, volume is either down or stagnant, driving the need for carriers to respond by cutting costs. So the carriers are definitely in cost cutting mode. We see daily announcements where both carriers are closing facilities or laying off individual employees. So you can definitely see that there's definite cost cutting measures taking place by both carriers. What you don't necessarily see, to their credit, is a major degradation to on-time service performance, mostly because the carriers have adjusted their published transit times, but also because they're still highly efficient. So, while we hear lots of negative things about the carriers making cost cuts that one could think would impact service levels, we don't necessarily see a major degradation in service. As a matter of fact, even recently, FedEx reintroduced the 7-day delivery network again. So things are still flowing through networks very well.
Okay, great. Um, and we had just talked about regionals a moment ago. I guess this question is more focused, along those lines. I sort of a last mile logistics update, if you will. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how the impact of these new or new-ish players, if you will, what their impact is on the more established carriers. Regionals filling sort of a consumer niche, if you will, maybe not so much on the commercial side as Adi had mentioned. I'd really like to unpeel the onion on that a little bit, if you will. So fire away.
So,
Sure, I could
I
jump
think,
in first.
good,
Or,
good,
go ahead.
yeah.
Sure. Traditionally, FedEx and UPS kind of ignored the influx of new last mile competitors. But over the past couple of years, we've seen increasing examples of FedEx and UPS reacting to regionals and other competitors. We also see FedEx and UPS losing longstanding volume to regionals as more and more shippers look to diversify their carrier mix, mostly because the alternative carriers have really proven themselves out, to be viable solutions. FedEx and UPS have responded in the past couple of years with annual GRIs. Both have taken smaller increases on lower zones, so the smaller transit times, while taking larger increases in the longer zones where they don't face competition from the regional carriers. So you also often see minimum charges climbing as the zones increase, where in years past the minimum would stay constant.
Okay, interesting. Um, and you can't help but notice, guys, what's happening with Amazon. Uh, you always you're hearing more about Amazon's logistics presence, Amazon shipping, the delivery service program, what have you. But when we view it in terms of that parcel and last mile segment, how do you guys sort of view what may be in store looking ahead? In terms of Amazon and their competitive presence, and obviously, and of course, what it means for the duopoly of FedEx and UPS.
I think there's a really important impact here, and the question is really going to be ultimately come down to, Jeff, whether Amazon starts pursuing more of the FedEx and UPS volume that's out there. Right now, they're picking and choosing volume that's great for them. We have customers, clients of ours, who have been approached by Amazon. We've seen some of the pricing examples that are out there. It's a similar pricing structure that's being offered by the carriers, UPS and FedEx, with important exceptions up front to try and get you to use them. And then over time, they'll waive a lot of the initial surcharges early. Then over time, that's going to be applied, come back in place. So ultimately, it's going to look like, at least currently, it's going to look like what FedEx and UPS does on the pricing side. What we don't see and what we don't know is, are they really going to be going after FedEx and UPS volume? Right now, they're targeting customers that are in locations that are good for them, where they have existing facilities, and their volume has to be focused on their volume, because both UPS and FedEx have essentially said, listen, we're not going to deliver Amazon stuff anymore. So that's what they have to handle first. The real question will be, after they get a grasp on handling all of that, how aggressively are they going to go after FedEx and UPS volumes in more rural, less dense areas? And that's when we're going to really see, I think, how much of a competitor they're going to be. They can be a competitor. They have the resources to do it. They're going about it, I think, in a pretty smart way. And the question is, over time, will they become a legitimate third competitor to UPS and FedEx?
Okay.
And I can add some color as well, Jeff. So
Yeah.
Amazon keeps their strategic plans pretty guarded, but all signs are pointing to a continued expansion of their product called Amazon Shipping. We're seeing some pretty aggressive Amazon proposals for some of our clients, but when it fits their model, but when it does, these bids are coming in really aggressive. Right now, Amazon Shipping's network is not fully developed. They're in about 15 to 20 metropolitan areas, and they're really looking for some very specific volume. So they want to have large quantities of volume at pickups. They generally prefer lighter weight shipments, those types of things. But when it fits, they're giving some really outstanding pricing and really competing very strongly with FedEx and UPS. But it's 4 to 5 years away from being a fully built out network. And to Audie's point, we don't clearly know the level to which they want to compete in some of those rural areas. Another thing that comes to mind as you think about Amazon becoming a shipper with, the Amazon shipping thing is, if you choose to use them, is there a conflict of interest for Amazon during peak season? So, if Amazon has to pick and choose its own shipments or a third party's shipments to make sure that they're hitting on-time commitments, they're going to obviously pick their own. So during peak, are you going to have full coverage that you need? So it's a question that still remains as they build out their network. But
I
That's
think
it.
there,
all indications are Amazon is full steam ahead on building out this Amazon shipping and becoming a viable, third party or third national carrier.
Okay.
I would add, Jeff, too, I think there are other factors too that are at play that with Amazon, which don't apply to other entities like the regionals. One is the notion of them being a monopoly. If you sell on Amazon, and then you're going to be required to fulfill with Amazon, and you're required to then be ship with Amazon, is that something that eventually the government will continue to allow? Is that too much power in one place? Are they going to be too vertically integrated in order for other folks to really get a fair shake? And so that, I think those are questions that are out there, particularly at a political level, where you have, Jeff Bezos, and how he's going to interact with the administration, how they're going to react to him. And so there is a real question about how quickly Amazon would move forward on trying to do more and more things, which might get them closer and closer to problems with the government as it revolves around things like antitrust.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Paul, I just wanted to go back to you real quick. You had noted that it would roughly take about 4 or 5 years for Amazon to fully build out its network. Um, that's obviously a significant amount of time. What would that fully entail, do you think? Like if you were just to like list ABC of things that need to happen in those 4 or 5 years in order for them to really build things out. What does that consist of?
Well, right now, they're in those 15 to 20, maybe a little bit more than that, major metro areas. And the reason for that is that's close to their facilities. So they're seeking pickup locations with high volume that are, within probably 100 miles or so of their major facilities. So what they need to do is build out the network enough where they're going to have enough volume. We talk about volume all the time. Volume is king, and it allows carriers to optimize their networks. What they need to do is be able to build out that network enough to be able to expand it into the more rural areas. So again, that's why I'm saying 4 to 5 years, because they're doing this through like a very deliberate process. They're
Mhm.
picking and choosing each metro that they're going into next, very deliberately. So that's why I'm saying it's 4 to 5 years.
Okay, great, great. All right, and let's take a look at the United States Postal Service, guys. There's been so much going on, especially in 2025 alone. Louis DeJoy is leaving. If he is, actually, he may be gone already as Postmaster General. There's been a lot of talk in regards to things related to the Delivering for America 10-year strategic plan. The Postal Service Reform Act has gotten attention too. And then there was talk about the Department of Commerce taking over the USPS, and also some actions related to Doge under the guidance of Elon Musk within the White House. I mean, talk about moving parts. It seems like in 2025, the USPS is full of them. I welcome you to address any or all of those things, or just a couple, or whatever you want to discuss as it relates to USPS.
So I think you're right. There's a lot going on there. And I think there was a lot going on before you introduced Doge. And Doge is a really key variable because one of the largest employers as part of the US government is the post office. So if you're going to
Right.
cut, that's probably somewhere you're going to want to cut. Now, all of these additional changes they made are going to affect service levels too. So we've talked about efficiencies they've created, but that is going to impact service, particularly in more rural areas. So there's a real question around that. We, as a general rule at Shipware, we don't see a lot of our clients pursuing opportunities with the post office. The general preference is UPS or FedEx, and that's really it. So I think you talked about perception. I think that perception issue is still a problem. There are people who are leery of using the post office because they have a concept of it being an inferior service. There are
Okay.
cost advantages to using it. There is still a question, though, now around service levels and everything happening at a higher Doge related federal government level just only adds to the questions around doing that. And do you really want to commit a large part of your parcel volume to the post office when those service levels may decline and or those costs may go up?
And Jeff, you mentioned Postmaster DeJoy may or may not be gone. He is gone now. But before he left, one of his strong initiatives was to build out a sales force. And one of his more recent you know interactions with the press, he applauded the efforts of his sales force. He was really proud of what his sales force was doing. And the reason I'm bringing up is because traditionally only large shippers were able to get negotiated service agreements with the USPS. But now this sales force is going out and making contact with small to medium sized shippers, who can now start to begin having some leverage in negotiations with the post office. So that's pretty significant in the sense that they're looking to expand their shipping network. USPS Ground Advantage for a lot of shippers has proven to be a significantly less expensive service than the economy services at FedEx and UPS, and it's still providing excellent transit times compared to FedEx and UPS. They're both right on par.
All right, that's a really great insight, guys. Appreciate that. Now to the ongoing topic of the day. That would simply be tariffs. It's kind of nonstop, kind of a whirlwind. We were joking in the office that keeping up with the tariff actions has been sort of like drinking out of a fire hose, if you will. Um, Perhaps most applicable to this conversation would be all the changes we're seeing as it relates to de minimis charges. And there's a lot going on there. There was an announcement within yesterday's White House executive order relating to de minimis with some significant changes. Addie, if you don't mind, can you sort of provide your take on what's going on with de minimis and how its potential for changing things and impacting shippers, especially on the e-commerce side, because it's
Yeah,
obviously focused on low value shipments.
yeah.
Uh, so why don't we take it from there?
Yeah, and I think the poster child for this are Shane and Timu, right? And
Of
so
course.
we have this loophole that's existed for some time. Items under $800 could come in duty free, and so as part of this tariff scenario that's going on, and really in particular as a way to how the tariff war has escalated with China, this is one of the victims has been this de minimis rule. So you had last week, again it was you had I think it was a 30% duty or $25 per item, and it's going to go up. It was going to go up to $50 an item starting June 1st. That was last week. The president signed that executive order. And then yesterday, just as you said, change. Now it's going to be 90 based on 90% of the value or $75 going up to $150 after June per item. So you're going to drastically change this pricing structure. And so there's other variables on that. What are the downslope impacts to that? One is, of course, just the cost, the sheer cost. These items are just not going to be something you're going to be able to purchase. And Shane and Timu and the other entities like that, how are they going to be impacted? But more broadly speaking, we just talked about the post office. They're responsible for handling a lot of this traffic, most of this traffic, all of this traffic. And can they apply those tariffs, and how efficiently can they apply those tariffs as things are coming in? That was one of the reasons that the initial attack on the de minimis rules were suspended or postponed, was because they said they couldn't do it. And that's another real question coming up here is what exactly are they going to do? How are they going to process all of that and charge these items that are going into individual residences across the United States? I mean, how are you going to collect on all of that efficiently? There are real questions around that. And I think this is one of the real results of the broader tariff application. It's been so sudden that nobody's had time to adjust, not the government responsible for processing the fees from the imports, nor the businesses that import items. And so it is going to be something where we're going to just have to see what happens. And then the negative impacts on that, how are companies adjusting? One of the things our clients are talking about is, how do we reduce costs elsewhere, whether it's packaging around items, whether it's the shipping costs specifically, what can we do to make up for our increased costs on tariffs, which we can't control?
Yeah, I mean it's a unique situation to be sure. And you talked about how the government's going to collect the on these tariffs. That could be a whole nother conversation. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, so I guess kind of a wait and see approach there. Now that we're almost officially in mid-April, I thought it might be a good time to talk about, it's never really too early to talk about peak season in terms of prospects, what's in store, etc. The 2025 peak season in particular, it feels like it could be quite different, just given um, what could happen based on the subsequent impact of tariffs. We saw that the United States is now going to be implementing a 104% tariff on goods imported to the U.S. From China, for example. It's going to be all kinds of different cost pressures, adjustments, if you will. I mean, there's a lot going on. How do you view, when you take all that stuff into account and other things too, um, how we could be viewing what's in store for the 2025 peak?
So Jeff, it's never too early to start planning for peak season. The carriers keep redefining what peak means, and they keep changing when they will start implementing peak season surcharges. So again, never too early to start planning for
Sure, sure.
peak. My advice is to, when you can, to shift your volume ahead as much as possible to get ahead of that calendar, get ahead of for when those peak season surcharges would start being implemented. Continue to monitor the carrier service guides to make sure that you're not missing anything as far as announcements are concerned, and definitely be prepared to diversify your carrier mix heading into peak season, just to make sure you can keep your costs low and introduce some competition into the mix. A year ago, I would have predicted a shift back towards the carriers having more leverage over shippers, but so far that hasn't happened. So as a result of that, my other advice is really to negotiate often and negotiate aggressively. Um, you likely have way more leverage than you realize, especially if you have someone on your team who really understands parcel pricing.
Okay, great. A great point. Um, and just to wrap up here, um, what types of advice or guidance would you provide for parcel shippers in terms of what market could look like, say, a year from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now, even? Given all this uncertainty and unpredictability that we've seen in a short time, I realize that may be a bit of a difficult question to answer, but if you were sort of to provide a cautious reply, how would you sort of answer that?
I think you're right. I think it's unpredictable. There's so many things happening. I do think, you had an economy that was growing, inflation was coming down, but it was still too high. And then the campaign indicated that was going to be the focus, trying to get inflation down. Now we have the introduction of these tariffs. They are going to be inflationary. The question is to what degree. And so as everybody tries to plan around that, what can you do? I think one of the things, and Paul mentioned it as it relates to parcel, you need to negotiate these deals. The carriers have trained people to think that when you sign a deal with them, that it's a deal that's supposed to be in place for 1, 2, 3 years. That's not the case. You can negotiate those deals, open them up. I think the other thing is, again, you've got to try and be proactive on these cost things. You can't control the tariffs. You can control costs in other areas. You can, as Paul also talked about as a reference peak, get inventory in early, get it out early before peak season surcharges apply. That's kind of what we're seeing with the tariffs. A lot of people pre-ordered volume, hoping to get it into the country before the tariffs apply. They're in place now, so you're going to have to manage that, but find other areas to reduce costs. We are also going to see, I think, some people waiting to see what will happen. You don't know, so it's hard to plan. Are these tariffs permanent? Are they not? Are they going to vary by country? Are we going to have negotiations? You hear the administration saying they're negotiating with some countries, but for other countries, these tariffs are going to be permanent. And so again, trying to see what happens, seeing what the dust settle is going to be key as well.
Yeah.
And I would also add, you're asking what the parcel industry looks like a year from now. Impossible to predict, but my prediction is we're going to see a lot of the same. So we hear pressures of perhaps recession coming. We see that the carriers are under constant cost reduction pressure. So, and we also see, again, to not to belabor the point on volume, but volumes are stagnant or slightly growing. So I think we're going to see a lot of the same in the parcel network, where FedEx and UPS are still going to be competing mostly on price to try to retain as much volume as they have. But it will be super interesting to see, number one, the impact of Amazon shipping, see if they've expanded more. And a year from now, also to see, have some of these other regional carriers survived? And do we still have all of these alternative solutions that we have right now? Will they survive? It's
Yeah.
hard to tell.
No, absolutely. It's going to be really interesting to see how things evolve over this time. Well, listen, guys, this brings us to the end of our allotted time for today's podcast. So, on behalf of Logistics Management Magazine, I'd like to offer up a big thanks to the both of you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate
Thanks
it.
a lot, Jeff. Yeah, thanks very much, Jeff. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those in the audience that would like to connect with either Adi and Paul, please feel free to check them out on LinkedIn, ADI Karamcheti, and Paul Yaussy. That's Yaussy. And also, please go ahead and check out the Shipware website, simply shipware.com, shipware.com. And if you're not subscribed to our podcast already, please go ahead and do so. All you got to do, wherever you get your podcast, is punch in Supply Chain 24/7 and it will come right up. And for those of you on Twitter, please feel free to go ahead and give us a follow. It's really easy. It's at Logistics MGMT. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day, and we'll catch up with you soon.